Hi everyone, welcome back to How the Light Gets In. Thank you for joining us again today. I appreciate you. So today I want to take a moment to play pretend with you. So let's pretend just for a minute that a few weeks ago you watched my video about whether or not you should go to therapy. And then you got on your computer or your phone and you went to psychologytoday.com and you found a therapist and you liked their profile and it looked like they knew how to do the things that you wanted them to do and they took your insurance, and so you called them and made an appointment. I hope that at least like 2 of you did that. That'd be super great. So anyway, your appointment's coming up and you don't really know what to expect of that appointment. So the content for this video, I drew a lot from like questions I see routinely on Reddit or things people post about on Twitter or, questions that clients have asked me. Because if you've never been to therapy before, it's kind of confusing what goes on. And I kind of take for granted a lot of the time that I get to like peer behind that curtain all the time. So I don't feel the need to explain things to people the way that I should. So I thought this would be a useful video. So that if you did go on psychologytoday.com and you did find a therapist and you were going to go see them, you would know what to expect once you got there. So first and foremost, a lot of therapists run independent practices where it's basically just them, which means that when you call to make that first appointment, you are probably going to wind up playing phone tag for a little bit. And I know that that's incredibly annoying. Look for email addresses. We're generally much better at responding to those, and then you can take your time and we can connect a little easier. So anyway, when you talk to the therapist or their front desk staff or whoever, they are likely going to ask you to come in a little early. And when they say that, they mean it. So there's like a whole novel worth of paperwork that you need to fill out. And that includes like HIPAA disclosures and releases of information and financial agreements and all manner of other good times. And then also there's usually like a symptom checklist and some things to fill out about why you're present in therapy in the first place. So if you don't show up early, the first 20 to 30 minutes of your intake is going to be you sitting in my lobby by yourself filling out forms. And I'm not going to give you a whole hour because I have a schedule and you have eaten into it. So if you're told to come in early, then actually do that. Most of the time now you can actually ask them to email you the paperwork ahead of time, and then you can fill it out at home while you watch Netflix and you can have your whole hour of therapy goodness. It is worth noting also that therapy time does not function the same way that time in the real world does. And it's not just because we're annoying, it's actually because of the way that insurance structures time. So an hour, according to an insurance company, is anything more than 53 minutes. 45 minutes is anything less than 52 minutes, but more than 37 minutes. So we don't do full 60-minute hours. We do typically 53 or 55 or 50-minute hours because that gives us time to like pee and eat and make the phone calls that we've been putting off and maybe do some paperwork or just like breathe for a second. And I know that on your end of things that can be kind of annoying, and I'm sorry, but I have to go to the bathroom sometimes. So kind of don't know what to tell you. Anyway, so there's all that. Show up early or get your paperwork ahead of time. I know it seems like it's not going to be a big deal, but unless you just straight up skip sections of the paperwork I give you, which a lot of people do, and then we just have to come back to it because you have to sign those before you're allowed to go to therapy. It's just how it works. Okay, so you've done all your paperwork, it's in your chart, your chart's been handed to me, and I've brought you into my office and you're sitting on my couch. So the purpose of the intake generally, and an intake is what we call your first therapy appointment, it is designed to gather information. Before you leave that day, I need to have a diagnosis in mind, because if I don't, your insurance is not going to give me any money. And while I realize that like that side of things is not interesting to people, I also have to eat. So we're going to have to get at least enough information for me to say like probably anxiety, or I think maybe depression, or whatever the case may be. It's unlikely that I'm going to offer you a lot of intervention or advice in that first session. And there's a lot of reasons for that. One of it is just that I need some time to sit with the information that you give me and formulate a plan. The other piece of it is until you have like bought into this whole therapy thing and you trust me and believe that the things I'm going to say are going to be helpful or good or useful or whatever, you're not going to take my advice anyway. So I tend to use that first session as a time to get to know you and let you get to know me and make sure that you and I are going to get along well enough to hang out for an hour every other week, and to kind of talk about what we might do moving forward. So if you're hoping that your first therapy session is going to be a giant revelation that solves all of your problems, probably not. Unless the problem you're coming to therapy for is to find out whether or not you want to be in therapy. You'll probably figure that one out in that first hour, I would think. So after that first appointment, when you come back, I found that, at least in my practice, and maybe this has more to do with me than it does with the client, but that second session is always a little bit awkward at the beginning. And part of that, I think, is that a lot of people come to their first therapy session at a time when they are not doing well or struggling with a lot, and they just kind of like word vomit all over me. And then they leave for 2 weeks and they come back and it's like, oh, you're still a virtual stranger, except you know all my secrets. And that creates a little bit of awkwardness there at first. And I think the other part of it is just that people don't really know what to expect, because that first session was mostly, questions and talking about issues. And so like, what happens now? So I personally, and a lot of other therapists, practice what's called client-centered therapy. And what that means is that therapy is whatever you decide it is. So whatever issues you bring to the table that day, whatever things you want to work on, if there's particular issues you want more skills with, that's what I'm going to do. I almost never have an agenda when a client comes in, unless it's like a small, like, oh, I noticed you filled out a release to this person. Is there something that you want me to send them kind of conversation? I don't have a plan because I want to be open-minded and ready for whatever you want to hand me that day. So be thoughtful about what you want to get out of therapy, both in each session and as a whole. The more that you have your own goals and things that you're wanting to work towards, the better therapy is going to go for you. And even if that goal really is just like, I don't want to feel like trash anymore, like that gives me something to work with and a direction to move into. But if I ask you why you're here and you say like, I don't know. So now what's going to happen is I'm going to poke and prod and dig and try and find something because you're not giving me a lot to work with. You're allowed to be in charge of your own therapy. Like, I know that you come to a therapist because you think a therapist is an expert who will help you. And that is true. But I'm not an expert on you. You are. So whatever problems you want to see get better in your life, whatever issues you want to find yourself dealing with more efficiently, those are the kinds of things that you should have at the forefront of your mind. I have a lot of clients who take notes throughout the weeks between sessions so that they can come in and say like, here's the things that happened and here are the questions I had. Or I was wondering if this is healthy or not healthy, or I'm wondering if there's a better way for me to do this, or whatever the case may be. Like, take responsibility for that. Because the more you do, the more equipped I am to help you. Like, a lot of people come to therapy and I'll say, how are things? And they'll be like, nothing really happened this week. Then we stare at each other for a minute. And then I say, well, what do you want to work on today? And then they say, I don't know. And then we stare at each other for a few more minutes. Bring stuff to the table. You're allowed to have days where you really don't have anything to talk about. And I found in my own therapy that those are some of the best sessions I've ever had, where everything's fine, but there's something that's been bothering my therapist for weeks that like now we have the time to dig into. You are allowed to do that. But I think broadly speaking, you'll get a lot more out of therapy if you come to the table with some questions or thoughts or ideas or problems that you want to work on. So here's the other thing. A lot of therapy is going to me asking you hard questions and pushing you to do hard things. I'm certain I've said this before, probably in more than one video, but my job is not to make you feel good. I really, really want my job to make you feel good. I would be excellent at it if that was my job. But that's not my job. My job is to help you have hard feelings in productive ways. So I think a lot of people go to therapy sessions and they leave feeling like crap, like way worse than they did going in. And so they think, well, this isn't working. I'm not going to go anymore. But that is how therapy works. You're going to feel worse sometimes. And instead of being angry that that's how you're feeling, you need to harness those negative emotions and use them to help you motivate yourself to deal with things. I'm not just going to send you out into the world pissed off and expect you to figure it out. Like, I'm going to help you see a problem more clearly, and I'm going to help you access the emotions that are connected to that problem. And we're going to talk about possible strategies for ways that you can deal with it. But you have to use those bad feelings as a reason to move forward. Because the only way out of most of the garbage that people come to therapy for is through it. There's very rarely a way to just kind of like move around it and not actually have to deal with any of it. It'd be super nice, right? But it's just not really a thing. Unless the problem that you're facing is that you keep doing something that puts a roadblock directly in front of your face, and I can be like, hey, you don't have to do that anymore. And you're like, oh, okay. But that's not a situation that comes up with any real frequency. So yeah, get ready for bad feelings, because they are a-coming. So I see posts on Reddit a lot, especially in the therapy subreddit, that ask questions like, am I allowed to do this? Am I allowed to do that? Is this okay for me to say? And usually the answer is yes. I mean, it's your therapy. You can say whatever you want. If you are like threatening my life or like hitting on me, we might have a conversation about how those things are not appropriate. But generally speaking, anything you want to do in therapy, you can probably do. Your therapist might suggest that you do it in a slightly more productive way, but it's all allowed. In particular, like, you're allowed to ask us questions. We have a choice about whether we answer them, just like you do. Because people sometimes need to know that I'm like a real person, and so they'll ask me questions about my life. And I have no problem with that. I will answer the ones that I think are appropriate for me to answer, and I will not answer the ones that I don't think are appropriate. You are also allowed to challenge us. If I tell you that I think this is your diagnosis, and then you Google some stuff and come back and are like, I think you're wrong, like, I'm not just going to tell you that you don't know what you're talking about. Like, we can talk about it. If there's something that you've seen that makes you think that this isn't quite right, I'm more than willing to be collaborative and work with you on figuring it out. If I've suggested an intervention that you really don't like and don't think is helpful to you, tell me about it. Let's talk about it. Let's see if we can come up with another idea. Like, you're allowed to challenge us. It's helpful if you do that in a constructive way, instead of just saying like, you're wrong and I'm never coming back. You can say like, I don't like this, or I didn't like the way that made me feel, or I'm wondering if there's a better way. Like, all of that is allowed. Therapy is your time. You paid for this hour and you get this hour, and we can do whatever you want with that hour. And if that includes you questioning me or pushing back against some of the things that I've said, I'm totally okay with that. Becoming a therapist does not make you a god. Like, I'm fallible, I'm wrong, and I know that and I'm comfortable with it. I'm more than willing to be told that I'm wrong. If you tell your therapist that you disagree with them and they have a real problem with it, you might want to get a new therapist, because we should be pretty cool in situations like that. So the last thing I want to talk about when you finally go to therapy is just some little some nuggets of ethical information, because there are certain guiding rules that therapists do their profession by that the average public person is probably not aware of. And so when you run into it, because we haven't bothered to pre-explain it, it just looks like we're great big weirdos. So here's one of the big ones. Legally speaking, if you are my client, I don't know you. Like, if I run into you at the grocery store, I don't know who you are. I'm not going to acknowledge that you exist. I'm not going to speak to you. I'm not going to come up and chat. And it's not because I don't care about you. It's because I legally am not allowed to do that. HIPAA, which is an acronym I can't remember what it stands for, but it's basically Health Information Protection Act, and then there's another letter. It's as close as I'm going to get, guys. I'm sorry. HIPAA says that no one gets to know that you're in therapy unless you decide that they get to know. So if I come up and talk to you at the grocery store and I'm like, hey, how are you doing? Blah, blah, blah. And then I leave, whoever you're with is going to be like, who was that lady? And that puts you in a really uncomfortable position. So I'm not going to do that to you. I know a lot of people super don't care if the entire world knows that they're in therapy, but I don't know that ahead of time. And unless you sign a release of information to every human being on the planet, I cannot just engage with you like I know you. Now, that having been said, like, you're allowed to come talk to me. Like, you're allowed to make my situation awkward because whoever I'm with doesn't get to know who you are or how I know you. I actually was out with a friend a couple months ago, and a client came up and we had like a 10-minute conversation. And then my client walked away and my friend asked me if I knew her, and I had to say no. And then for the rest of the day, my friend was like, "Who was that? That was weird. Why did she talk to you about that? What's going on?" And I'm just like, "Yeah, I don't know. It was like a really weird thing for a person to do. Let's talk about something else now, please." Like, I mean, she knows what I do for a living, so you would have thought she could have connected those dots all by herself, but she did not. Anyway, so here's the other thing. Everything that you tell me as your therapist is a secret unless I am legally mandated to do otherwise. So people get very sketchy about telling me certain things in therapy. They don't want to tell me about drugs that they're using. They don't want to tell me about crimes that they may have been committing and not been prosecuted for, things of that nature. There are only a few very, very specific reasons why I can ever tell anyone anything that you've said to me unless you've given me permission. So if you are talking about child abuse, if you are talking about the abuse of an elderly or disabled person, or if I think you are in immediate danger to yourself or other people, that's it. Those are the only reasons I'm ever able to just call someone and talk to them about you without your written consent and knowledge. So you can tell me if you smoke weed. It's fine. Not gonna call the police or anything. You can tell me that one time you shoplifted. Can't tell anyone. You can tell me that you and your husband got in a fight the other night and he punched you in the face. You're an adult person. You're not compromised. That's not something I'm allowed to disclose. All of those things are secrets. I can't tell anyone. I do write session notes every time I see you, but my session notes are about 4 sentences long, and even if you were in the room with me that day, you wouldn't really know what I was talking about. And I do that on purpose because it is possible for the notes that I write to be subpoenaed by a court. And if that happens, I don't really want to give them any information, so I don't write anything down. Ever. Just remember it. I'm real good at that. Not everyone operates their practice that way, but that is how I do it. Anyway, you should rest assured that some minor illegal activity is not going to leave your therapy room. You're allowed to disclose those things without any fear of repercussion or being ratted out or getting in trouble or whatever. This one's a little harder to talk about. And actually, if you look at the disclosure on my YouTube channel, it uses a lot of this same language, but we are not friends. I am your therapist and you are my client. We're not buddies. We don't have a relationship that exists outside of therapy. And that doesn't mean that I don't care deeply about my clients, because I absolutely do. There's no way I could be effective at my job if I didn't. What it does mean is that while I appreciate the invitation, I cannot come to your graduation or your wedding or your party. As we talked about earlier, I can't talk to you if I run into you at the store. Our relationship exists within the confines of my office and basically nowhere else. And I know that that's really weird as a client, because you feel like you know your therapist on this whole other level because you've told them all these deep, intimate secrets and they've been part of this like beautiful little moment of meeting with you. But it is what it is. I have to maintain a professional distance there, which means that sometimes when you really want to change the subject and you just want to like make a joke and move past it, I'm not going to let you do that, because I need you to sit there in this moment with me and feel terrible. And it means that I'm not going to do anything for you that I wouldn't do for any other client. That's one, I'm not generally good at reading quotes. You guys have probably noticed I always have to read those because they don't get locked in here very good. So there's a quote from my ethics textbook from back when I was in grad school that has been locked in my head for years and years now. And the quote is, "The road to hell is paved with the idea that this client is different, this situation is different, or you are different." And I've never forgotten that, because it's true. When you start finding ways as a therapist that things are special, you start doing stuff you're not supposed to do. And I really, really like having my license and my job, and I don't want to lose them, so I follow the rules. And that brings up something important too, actually. If a therapist has ever truly wronged you and done something inappropriate, you do have recourse as a consumer. You can contact your state's regulatory board for therapists and file a complaint. And I don't think most people know that. However, I hear a lot of stories about terrible, terrible things that therapists have done, and that should be known. So if something has happened, please reach out to your local state regulatory board, make a complaint. Some people who are therapists maybe shouldn't be therapists because they do crazy things. Okay, so after all of that rather heavy discussion about ethics and laws and rules and therapy, I want to end this on a slightly lighter note, mainly just because I personally find this very funny. So when I was in graduate school, and up until I think 4 years ago-ish, the way that the ethical code for marriage and family therapists was written, there's a line item that prohibits sexual relationships with clients, because duh, that should never happen. But the way that it was written, you were allowed to sleep with your clients as long as therapy had ended at least 2 years ago. Which is just truly beyond me, because that's so not a long enough period of time, and it's just not something anyone should ever do. So anyway, 3 or 4 years ago, they changed it, and now that can never, ever, ever happen. Which is good, but it's a thing that you should know, because if your therapist is hitting on you, it's an uncomfortable and unethical situation. And you again should look up their local licensing board, because we're not allowed to do that for any reason, ever. Okay guys, thank you for coming. Thank you for listening to me babble about all of these things. I hope I maybe answered some questions that you have. If you have more, you can leave them in the comments below, or you can email me or find me on Twitter. Like this video and share it, and subscribe to my channel. Every 2 weeks I make one of these, and sometimes they're pretty good, I think. So yeah, I'll see you guys next time. Bye.